Hey guys, welcome back. And this week we're taking a look at a few Super Nintendo games that I've been told repeatedly by other people that I need to take a second look at. Since all of these are games that I did reviews on years ago on this very channel, and I was actually pretty hard on them. And maybe unfairly so, since I just had way less patience about this whole content creation thing back then. And I'll get more into that with each individual game, but I'm still gonna make sure that I go into them this time without any weird nostalgia goggles or biases. But will that work? Well, probably not, but I'm gonna try at least. So let's get started with a game that I don't think anyone agreed with me on when I said it sucked when it was originally posted back in 2017. Jurassic Park Part 2, The Chaos Continues for the Super NES still has way too long of a name, but it may be a better game than what I originally thought. The previous video for Jurassic Park 2 is still up if you'd like to watch it, but the gist of it was that it came out at a time when 16-bit run-and-gun action games were a dime a dozen. And besides some excellent graphics and sound, it may have been a little bit too samey and a little bit too late to cash in on that Jurassic Park craze at the time. But I don't think there was one comment agreeing with me on that video, so this time I'm going to go into it with a completely different mindset and just review it for what it is. And what it is probably exactly what you'd expect, a run-and-gun action game in the same vein as something like Contra, I guess. But when Jurassic Park 2 finally came out on the Super NES back in 1994, kids had been waiting a while for a solid Jurassic Park game on that system. Since Ocean's previous Jurassic Park game on the Super Nintendo was more of an adventure-style game, with some wild first-person shooter sections tossed in as well. It was very unique for the time, but it certainly didn't scratch that action game itch that you were seeing with Jurassic Park games on other consoles. But that all changed with this game, since you're basically just tossed right into a stage select menu, and then it's essentially you running and gunning through the rest of the game. You'll be going through places like the depths of a volcano that's filled with dinosaurs for whatever reason, which may actually just be the worst thing ever. And also to the tops of mountains where you'll be fighting a bunch of pterodactyls that really want to protect their babies. In between, you get a good bit of variety as well as you fight your way through park facilities or out into the open plains where you're trying to protect a bunch of gallimimuses, or however you pronounce that. But while all of these stages do a pretty good job of making you feel like you're running rampant through Jurassic Park, I will say that a lot of them do have a more maze-like quality to them, making you find your way through them. And this game loves to respawn enemies, so getting through some of these stages can be a little frustrating. And the action in those stages is pretty solid, with your character being able to run and gun with the best of them. You get 6 weapons to deal with bad dudes and dinos alike with, and the game even gives you every one of them at the start of each stage. Though you do have to rely on limited ammo, so you better learn to use the big guns when you really need them. And while that action is solid enough, Jurassic Park 2 at least tries to mix it up a little bit by introducing an extinction number at the top of the screen. This basically means that you shouldn't try to kill every single dinosaur that's coming at you, since doing so will actually reduce their overall numbers. So the game wants you to use your secondary set of non-lethal weapons to take out pretty much every dinosaur that isn't a raptor or a T-Rex. This is actually a neat little way to keep you from just blasting your way through each level, since you'll need to change back and forth between lethal and non-lethal weapons to make sure that you don't cause a second extinction. But doing so is a bit clunky, since the left trigger cycles through 3 lethal guns and the right trigger cycles through 3 non-lethal weapons. And with as fast as most things are coming at you in this game, you don't have much time to worry about what you want to survive when literally everything on this island is trying to kill you. And I mean everything, because not only do you have to deal with all the dinosaurs running rampant on the island, but you also get InGen's finest soldiers trying to take you out as well. And I think that's actually a pretty cool idea, since a lot of these stages can vary wildly depending who or what you're fighting in them. Though I will say that fighting the dinosaurs are far more interesting than the soldiers, since they just mostly exist to stand around and take cheap shots at you whenever they get the chance. And that leads into probably the game's biggest issue that I still have with it. It's just too damn cheap. If you ever want to see the definition of cheap hits in a video game, just play this one. Pretty much every single enemy in this game, human or dino, waits just off screen to fire or jump at you almost the instant that you notice them. There's almost nothing you can do in most cases. Even if you know that they're there, you'll probably still be taking a hit. But the humans are especially bad since they just sit back and take shots at you constantly, leaving you without any real means to avoid those attacks. The dinos are at least a little bit more forgiving, but even they love to just swarm you or do leaping attacks from off-screen before you even know that they're there. You do at least have a dodge move that theoretically is supposed to move you out of the way of things coming at you, but it's just a little bit too slow and doesn't last long enough to be useful in most areas. To me, this is still by far the game's most annoying thing about it. Even coming back to it this time, there's just too many times where cheap hits would ruin an otherwise good time. Thankfully, the game's presentation softens that blow just a little bit, because even coming back to it now, I cannot deny that this one isn't a looker. From the very beginning, Jurassic Park 2 starts off with a fully animated and voiced opening cinematic.
InGen must be eliminated.
This is like CD-ROM quality stuff here, and it's still one of the best examples of an animated cinematic on the system. And even after that, you get treated to an incredible looking game. Ocean Software games always had hit or miss gameplay, but they could usually at least give you some spectacular eye candy, and Jurassic Park 2 spares no expense in that regard. The stages are all super detailed and well drawn. Characters are animated insanely well for a Super Nintendo game, and the dinosaurs are the star of the show since they're the best on any system at the time, especially that T-Rex that chases you down while you're blasting him from the top of a moving Jeep. And even the music is suspiciously good here, so no matter what you think about the gameplay, this is definitely 5 out of 5 on the presentation side of things. So why was I so hard on this game back in the day? Well, sometimes when I do these reviews, if you want to call them that, it can be hard to completely remove myself from the time when these games came out. Since unlike a lot of people on YouTube, I was actually there. I read the reviews, I heard what other kids said about it, and I played it for myself. And I guess sometimes that experience just stays with you. But I will admit that coming back to Jurassic Park 2 this time with less of a focus on how I felt about it back then was a much more enjoyable but still frustrating experience. I don't think it's really doing anything amazing besides that intro cinematic, but it's still pretty great if you just want a run and gun Jurassic Park game on the Super Nintendo. I just really didn't at the time. But I can totally see how kids would have loved this one back then, especially if they had a friend to play with, because this is actually a pretty great co-op game as well. So if you like shooting guns at dinosaurs, then this is still a solid, if occasionally very frustrating, Jurassic Park game to check out on the Super Nintendo. Congo's Caper for the Super NES may not have been the Joe and Mac sequel that I wanted at the time, but it's still a really solid game on its own. Congo's one of those Super NES games that seems to confuse a lot of people, since it's either a sequel or a spin-off to Joe and Mac depending on who you ask. And I do remember it being called Joe and Mac 2 in magazine previews when I was a kid. Hell, the Japanese name for this is literally Fighting Cavemen 2, which is what Joe and Mac was called in Japan. And if you're still gonna argue with me that this isn't a sequel to Joe and Mac, let me direct you to the Data East Wiki, which yes, does exist, and it very clearly states that this is a sequel to Joe and Mac. So don't yell at me, yell at the wiki. For whatever reason though, Data East decided to change things up here in the West and simply call this one Congo's Caper, with no real reference to Joe and Mac on the box. But Data East wasn't fooling me, since I knew this was some sort of sequel to Joe and Mac. And I think maybe that's why I was harder on this game than I should have been in the original review. But for the time being, let's just toss all of that to the side and see if Congo here can stand alone without me constantly complaining that it's not as good as Joe and Mac was. Get into the game and you get a little story explaining how this weird Ruby suddenly turned a couple of prehistoric monkeys into people for whatever reason. And just like Joe and Mac, your girl is immediately kidnapped, which probably makes Congo's monkey brain go insane with monkey rage. After all that though, it's time to start your new life as a vengeance-seeking human-monkey hybrid. You do that by smashing cavemen with your club, rolling them across the ground, and then maybe also hitting them with your club, and other forms of club-related violence. But just don't get hit yourself, or Congo reverts to his monkey form, which really doesn't change anything. It just kind of means you can only take one more hit before you die. Oh, and you can also watch him shake his monkey butt if you're into that kind of thing. And just going by that, the game does sort of feel like Joe and Mac, but Congo's drugged-up monkey brain gives him abilities that Joe and Mac sorely lacked, like being able to leap super high into the air and come smashing down on top of enemies, or being able to grab stuff like branches or vines and then swing off of them. And it's not just for show, since Congo is much more of a platformer than Joe and Mac ever was. In fact, there's entire stages built around just using Congo's monkey moves to make it through them. And I think this is really where Congo shines. The action and spectacle isn't quite up to Joe and Mac's dinosaur adventures, but Congo has his own brand of platforming action that really stands on its own. Plus, the stage variety is great here, really putting Congo through his paces on a variety of levels. And after that first set of levels, Congo lets you choose whichever level you want to play next, which automatically makes any game better than it should be. There's other little stuff here and there, like how you get a slot machine at the top of the screen whenever you grab a gem, with more than a few combinations that can win you some extra stuff while you're actually playing. You also get a bunch of bosses to face off with here as well, though I will admit that this is one area where I really missed Joe and Mac's huge dinosaur battles here. You do get a bit of that at the beginning, but there's just as many times where you're fighting something like a ninja or a pirate for whatever reason, and I'm just not feeling that. What I am feeling though is just how good Congo looks. The graphics and music here is what I can only describe as sunny Saturday morning back in 1993. There's just something about the warm look of the graphics and that classic Data East soundtrack that just makes me feel so damn good. It's not the most detailed game ever, but everything looks really good, and all the stages look distinct enough that it keeps you playing. The only thing that I really don't like is how the platforms in the sky really look out of place with the rest of the game. But overall, this is still one of those games that is just drenched in nostalgia for me, as far as the graphics go anyway. So what do I think of Congo this time? Well, I mean, I've always liked this game. I rented it several times as a kid, and I still think it's a really good, underrated Super NES platformer that barely gets talked about. My disappointment in the original video wasn't because the game was bad, but more so from confusion due to magazines at the time labeling this as an on-again, off-again sequel to Joe and Mac. And I still say it's not a good Joe and Mac sequel. Joe and Mac 2 is a good Joe and Mac sequel. Congo, though, is a fun little platformer on its own. It's not doing anything that's gonna blow your mind, but it was always a solid weekend rental for me. And if you guys are itching for a Super NES platformer that flies under pretty much everyone's radar, or if you just really like monkeys shaking their butts, then you could do a lot worse than this excellent Joe and Mac sequel / spin-off / whatever the hell you want to call it. Nosferatu for the Super NES is definitely one of those love it or hate it games, and one that I could have probably spent some more time learning. Nosferatu is a weird one. I was actually kind of positive overall about this game in the original video, more so than most people are about it in fact. But one thing that I feel like I didn't put enough time into was learning the game's combat. And the reason for that was simply because I didn't like it. So this time, I'm gonna do my due diligence and work my way through it. But first, let's get a refresher on the game to see if I missed anything else. I know I just got done talking about how good the intro movie in Jurassic Park 2 was, but Nosferatu went wild on the Super Nintendo with these. One of the most impressive things about the game is just how good the animation is throughout, but the cutscenes in this game are even better. Just about every one of these super detailed scenes have been animated to a staggering degree. Like, look at the animation on this horse as you gallop across the fields, or how your character runs up to the castle and then pauses before he gets the courage to run in. Or Nosferatu just looking over his mansion in the shadows. These are all incredible, especially on the Super Nintendo. But once you get your jaw off the floor from the cutscenes, it's time to actually play this hoss. And if you've ever played something like Prince of Persia, then you're gonna feel right at home with Nosferatu, since it's pretty much just like that in terms of how you play the game. Minus the combat, but we're gonna get to that here in a second. But running and jumping around the maze-like levels are all pretty much lifted straight from Prince of Persia, just in a much darker, more gothic style. Actually, I think that's what initially drew me to Nosferatu. You say you got a game that's like Prince of Persia, but it's drenched in gothic horror with a bunch of classic movie monsters in it? Well, yeah, sign me up, because that is totally my thing. And for this aspect of the game, I think Nosferatu nails it. The stages are all these giant labyrinths where you basically need to find your way to the end of the level by solving puzzles, opening doors, and trying to stay out of spiked pits. It's classic Prince of Persia stuff, and it works really well here too. At least until the enemies show up, and this is where Nosferatu becomes very divisive. Now, if you ever looked at the slower, more precision-based gameplay of Prince of Persia and you were like, you know what? I sure would like it if the developers put in an overly complicated fighting game-like list of moves that seems completely out of place with the rest of the game. Well, guess what? I got just the game for you. Nosferatu is infamous for its combat, since anytime you want to engage in fisticuffs, it's time to break out the moves list. There's nearly a dozen things that you can do to any given enemy, all requiring multiple buttons and directions to be pressed on the D-pad at the same time. And it's not done well, since several moves share the same button presses. Like if you want to do a spinning back kick, this is what you need to do. Got it? But if you want to do a quick dodge to get out of the way of an enemy, you need to do this. Look familiar? There were so many times when I needed to dodge and just ended up doing a back kick because I pressed one of the buttons just slightly different than I did for the other move. And this is just one instance, since I can guarantee that you'll be doing moves that you never intended to do over and over again. And if that's not enough for you, there's even an entire combo list that changes based on the amount of crystals that you pick up while you're playing. And when you're dealing with enemies that can barely stumble forward, it all starts to feel like it's just overkill. Now don't get me wrong, I don't mind that they put this whole thing in the game, but it just doesn't work really well. I have now played this game a good deal for both of these reviews, but I still just don't get what this game is trying to do as far as the combat goes. And at this point, I don't think it's a me thing. And it's a real shame because the game surrounding that is classic stuff. Exploring the levels is a lot of fun since you can find items and power-ups that are actually meaningful to the game, like those crystals that I was talking about. Plus, pulling off precise jumps one after another is just as satisfying here as it was in Prince of Persia. And figuring out which buttons to press to open doors and then figuring out how to get to them, I mean, it's all great. Hell, walking face first into a spike trap in this game is actually kind of fun. And when you're not awkwardly flailing at them, the enemies are really cool too. You've got a classic assortment of ghouls and monsters that want to kick you out of their castle, and it can be kind of fun figuring out the optimal way to take out each one. Though thanks to the combat, just ignoring most of them ends up being the best way to go. You even get some pretty cool bosses at the end of each stage, but unfortunately, you just can't ignore these guys, which can make some of these fights pretty tedious. At least they're all neat to look at, like werewolves and this guy that just kind of pukes a lot. Though I really don't know why Nosferatu has employed a pair of apes to take you out. But guys, seriously, I tried my best to get the hang of it this time. I'm sure there are people out there that's actually mastered this, and I did do better with their suggestions this time, but I just never had much confidence with it. I still think it's a fun one to check out if you're curious, but it is definitely not for everyone. If you like Prince of Persia style games and you can acclimate yourself to the awkward combat, then I think there's a neat game here. But that combat is such a big part of the game, and unless you really want to put the time into it and the frustration to mastering it, then I don't think this trip to Nosferatu's castle is worth it, no matter how good it looks. And I think that's going to do it for this week because there's only so much crow that I can eat. I think what it boiled down to back then was that I was just trying to push content out as fast as I could without even thinking about how to get my point across. And it's not like I'm good at it now, but I at least try to consider it. And I hope you guys appreciate that, even if you disagree with me, because believe it or not, this is all just my opinion at the end of the day. I'm just one of those weird guys that likes to make videos about them. But if you do happen to agree with me or just like the vibe around here, then do that thing that people do when they like a YouTube video. And if you want to throw in a sub, well, that'd be totally swell. But I think that's gonna do it for me this week. Check back next week for some more games to disagree with me about. But until then, thanks for watching, guys.